Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's Truth Foragers here on the Boys in the Baltic Star channel. Once again, it is a delight to be back. As some of you may know, we have unfortunately been, I don't like to use the word banned. I'm going to go more with disowned from many other channels that we have recorded on in the past. But thankfully, the wonderful Boys in the Baltic Star have allowed us to take up some evenings from time to time to share our message of truth and wonderment with you, our beloved foragers, who snuffle with us and often bring a lot of insight and really good points to our evening. If it is your first time here watching the Truth Foragers, thank you so much for joining us. We already have your IP addresses, and I can see from Rick's um, attention, he is already sending the relevant forms you need to fill in. Fingerprints, for those of you that haven't burnt them off, why haven't you, quite frankly? Um, an extracted tooth so we can prove your DNA. Anything else, Rick, going out with this next batch of ID checks?
I think you've pretty much covered it. The only other thing, obviously, is following some conversations we had. A complete map of the bumps on people's heads is going to be called for this time.
It's wise. After that incident last time, we wouldn't want that to happen again. I think it's better to be safe than sorry, Rick, as we always say.
Absolutely, very important stuff.
Those of you watching, um, thank you for joining us this evening. We hope that you will find. Sorry that the screen's gone funny. I'm changing some viewer rewards. Please bear with us. It could be a government plot. We don't know, but I think it's just that. I just realised the wrong things were up. Um, the boys in the Baltic Star have left their rubbish behind, Rick, as they always do, and it's down to us to clear things up a little bit.
They do make the internet a little bit untidy.
I do worry about them. I do feel that they're going to leave some important pieces of information behind that they don't mean to at some point. I feel like we're doing their job for them sometimes.
Um, well, it is a public service that we only really do for them because, they're kind enough to give us their airtime.
They truly are, and we thank them ever so much for that. We will always be thankful for them in that regard. Okay, I think everything is set. Perfect. Okay, so if you've been here before, you know what to expect. We're going to have 4 urban myths this evening that we have researched over months, sometimes years, especially one of them, that we're going to bring to all of you here. More of that in a second. There's a red sun there which you can click, which is from the Boys from the Baltic Star. They've allowed us to have a few of our own things you can spend on. If you feel the need to call on our spirit animal, Vincent Price, then please do, and he shall appear on the screen and help us all out. At the end of each myth, we will put across whether we believe in this myth or whether we remain skeptical. You two can, not the band, thankfully, you guys can, although if you two are watching, they can join in as well. But you can join in by saying whether you believe or remain skeptical. And we will count up and see whether the myth has truly captured the hearts of those watching or whether they're still not so sure and more research needs to be done. If any of you in chat um, have any information at all about an urban myth that we are following, then please feel free to talk out in chat if you have any further information. If you've got any questions about it, please ask, and we will do the best to use our research and our thoughts to answer, because of course we are going through these together and you snuffle with us. But now for the introductions before we begin properly. My name is Dickie Wagwan. I live somewhere in Kent. I have about 7 different places that I like to lay my hat, as it were. And I am one of those this evening. I don't like to say where it is. Even Rick doesn't know. But we feel that our friendship has gone beyond the point where we need to know where we are at any time, of course. And I am drinking tonight from a special piece of Truth Foragers merchandise. We have mugs saying, it's all back to front there, but it says, I snuffle for truth truffles, the #1 urban myth and mystery podcast. There is the distinguished gentleman. There is the that statue, and there is the gas attendant. They're all there. Happy memories from our research. And Rick, you'll be pleased to know that I have a mug for you, which
Oh,
I'm training the pigeon to carry heavier and heavier loads, and when it is ready, it will be winging its mug to you, Rick Bishop. Good evening.
good evening. Very nice to be back with you, and thank you. That's very kind.
Oh, a
Um,
pleasure, a pleasure.
yes, we we are back foraging for truth truffles, as you say, and very much looking forward to tonight. So I think there are going to be some fun ones this evening.
There always is. Of course, between the two of us, we've researched many, many, many myths and legends over the years. Um, and sometimes Rick doesn't know which of the pot I'm bringing out and which sometimes he does. He knows three of them this evening, but one is a real blast from the past, and I'm hoping that he still remembers because he did spend a good year and a half really looking deep into it. So I'm hoping that he remembers that for later on. I thought that'd be a little treat for you, Rick, a little bit of something special.
Mm, sounds fantastic.
But I thought I'd build into that first with another myth. Are you ready to start snuffling tonight, Rick?
Very much so.
I'm gonna put some music on while I go to the graphics. Please apologise for both of us that there's gonna be a change of graphics while this happens.
Yes, at some point I should just relate the story of my most famous one, of course, but that will have to wait for another time.
I honestly, that's a whole episode in itself. To be honest, I would love to
Probably
listen to
is.
all of that. I couldn't believe how close you got to Brian Blessed at one point during your research of that.
It was remarkable. Yes, the matter of the umpire's lair. Yes, it was.
It was, I'm getting tingles even thinking about it. It
Mm.
must be said. But speaking of tingles, we're going to start this evening with, and you know it very well, of course, it is the myth of the silent spire.
So, this, as I'm sure you're aware, is a very specific local legend. For those who haven't heard about it, it comes from a small market town in England called Fletcham, and Fletcham's a perfectly nice place. It's very pleasant to visit, and it has one of those churches that dates back centuries, and then the Victorians, as part of their desire to beautify the country, put a new spire on the church in order to make it look a bit more, well, make it taller, make it more elegant, make it look a bit more imposing. And little did they know that the spire itself would prove to be such a remarkable tale.
It's interesting. We found over the years, of course, that a lot of the most captivating tales do indeed come from Victorian times.
Mm.
There must have been something in the ice, something in the mist swirling around that really captures the imagination. Those gaslights, the sort of the half looks that people could see.
Mm.
The Industrial Revolution. There was people were pushed to the very edge sometimes of belief and disbelief when it comes to such myths, and the Silent Spire is one of those for that village of Fletcham. It's it spread, of course. People didn't travel quite so much from the villages in those times, Rick, maybe to the nearest town, the village along, but it remained quite an insular tale for quite some years.
It did. Um, I mean, Fletcham isn't near a very big city or anything like that, so it's entirely possible that lots of little local communities knew about it in the immediate vicinity, but it didn't spread widely. Um, yeah, so it is an odd tale. Um, so when the tower was reconstructed at the sort of west front of the church, there was an interesting development, which was that in order to put um, the new spire on top, which is a fairly heavy stone construction, the the old bell house on top of the square top tower had to be temporarily removed, and the bells were then stored and put back into the bottom of the new spire, essentially into the new construction. And it is the way of the world that once you've installed these bells and people have stood there and made sure they're set up correctly and they're all safe and everything, then people carry out a quick test. They start pulling on bell ropes and seeing what happens. And for those who were there inside the church, everything seemed absolutely fine. But bells aren't really supposed to just ring for those inside the church. Um, and as soon as you set foot outside, even just outside the door, not a sound could be heard. It is remarkable, and it's one of those myths that up until very recently you could have actually gone and confirmed for yourself.
Hmm.
But as you know, the spire of the church was struck by lightning just a couple of years ago, and the entire top of the building burnt down. The bells were destroyed and crashed down into the base of the tower. Um, Tragically, um, it doesn't appear that the bells will ring again anytime soon. But they are rebuilding that portion of the building, so we will find out not too long in the
Hmm.
future
Hmm.
whether or not it remains a silent spire.
It's it it truly is a wonderful tale. I think better for the fact that, as you often say, Rick, too much concrete proof makes things harder to believe at times. Whereas the Silent Spire, we just have rough written records from locals, often
Mm,
many of whom couldn't write properly. Some stories spoken from person to person. Some missives written in local news. Um, a particular tale of a shocked baker who saw the campanologists um, walking into the church, um, saw them again walking out, having spoken of a wonderful session, and he had
mm.
not heard a thing at all. And his was the longest piece of writing I think we found in our time. He put it to an interesting poem, if I remember, and it for me that was a touching part of the tale.
It is actually a weird thing about bakers is that they do seem to write extensively.
Hmm. It was it's, it was just a beautiful piece, it must be said. And for me, the most interesting part of the poem was when he there was a whole verse dedicated to speaking to one of the bell ringers.
Mm,
And I can't remember the verse exactly. My words, as you know, are quite clumsy when it comes to rhyming and such like. But the poet talked of how his even with his ears still a ringing, as he stepped outside the church, they cleared immediately, and that's fascinating to me. Even
mm.
for those in there, the second they leave, it's as if they've not heard it at all.
I know it appeared in one of my researches into war records. There are a significant number of stories of the paranormal that are recorded in military journals and meetings, and there was one in particular where in a meeting conducted in the local county offices, when they'd been instructed to ring church bells in order to warn of potential invasion,
Hmm.
and they made a little note saying that this will not, of course, work in Fletcham, and they'd need to make other arrangements. It was so widely known by then in that local region that something that I hadn't heard about until I spoke to people from there, but it was so widely known. It was included in top secret planning.
One of my favourite things I found from old papers was from the local rag, as it were. Um, there was an announcement that the church was indeed open, and this was 4 weeks after it properly reopened, and the vicar, the Reverend Stephen Cavalier, had been upset because they'd been ringing the bells for people to come to church, and
Mm,
no one had come.
mm.
People had not heard the call to church, and assumed that it was still being finished. And I found that quite funny in a way to start with, but I think it showed that although they could hear inside, even riding past on a bicycle or walking, nothing.
Yeah, it is. It is allegedly a remarkable phenomenon, and one that, of course, the truth is, tens of thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands of people would have experienced, but the vast majority wouldn't know. They would have gone past a church with a silent spire and assumed no one was ringing a bell.
your your great grandfather, Rick, um, uh, he knew someone, if I remember correctly, an old friend who had done before the spire was struck by lightning, of course, had done research into breaking a window. I know he had to get it was done very covertly, so it didn't come out for a while, of course, because you don't want to break windows in a church. But he had broken a window while bells were being rung to see if that made a difference.
I only found this out relatively recently when I was going through old family records, and um, of course, I got into this business as part of a family trade, essentially. For six, seven generations now, my family has been investigating the strange and the unusual. And yes, it was indeed my great grandfather who had met someone who'd conducted exactly that experiment to wait until he'd asked for permission and it had been not granted. It has to be said. Um, so he waited until the bell ringing was fully on, sneaked into the church to confirm that he could hear it, smashed a window with a small hammer, which he routinely apparently kept about his person, which, as I understand it, is because his job was that of a fishmonger,
Mm,
and apparently they carry small, easily concealable hammers on their person. I don't know why.
mm.
Anyway, he smashed the window and then leapt outside through the door to see if he pressed his ear up to the hole, could he hear anything from inside? And the man apparently reported that he could not.
Yeah, and for me, that a man making an actual experiment, putting everything in place as best as he could at the time, given all the options with the smashed window and still nothing is. When you told me that, I did get a chill. It felt something supernatural, like there was something deep and I wouldn't say sinister, but something with real weight to it in that. Did you I assume that before the spire was built with the old bell tower, they rang freely. I think you put together the tune. You managed to for a while get the tune that the bells made for a recorder piece, I believe, that you played at one of your meetings a while back.
Yes, it is that there were a number of local songs that they played on those bells because though they had a more or less full set of bells up there, there are always slight variations in what you can play in each tower's set. And what what I found was that my rendition of these tunes on the recorder at a public meeting obviously made a lasting impression because all offers to repeat the performance have been completely unnecessary. Apparently, everyone can remember it quite distinctly. Um, yes, so accordingly, I feel that there is probably work still to be done here, but once the money has been raised by the local community to reconstruct this tower in its original arrangement, we'll have to find out if the new bells, the new mountings, the new tower will still have the same effect. Is it the place? Was it the original construction or the original bells? And as for the original bells, I'm sorry to say they appear to have gone missing while they were stored and being repaired from the fire.
Did you look much into the documents that I sent you? Oh, when would it be? Early last year, I think it was early 2023. Because suddenly it came to my attention. Someone had emailed them to me, which I appreciate very much. If you're watching tonight, thank you. It reopened the story for me. But this was a person that had been to your recital, said that it was unforgettable, in fact, um,
Hmm.
and that they still that the notes were still ringing in their ears to this day. Um, they said that they'd heard of some campers who had been camping in a field nearby and could swear that they heard that tune. They described it to him, and he recognized it as yours. Um,
Hmm.
that tune emanating from a farmhouse along the way. Did you look further into that? With the bells missing, is there power still in the bells, or do you think that's merely coincidence?
I did take the opportunity to make contact with the owner of the land and indeed the farmhouse, and there was, I think it's fair to say, I was rather rebuffed.
Hmm.
There was no seeming willingness or openness in this matter, which, as you know, if you approach anybody with a completely reasonable request to dig up their garden, hunt through their cellar, or
Hmm.
examine their attic, as we have done on countless occasions
Of
with
course.
countless different people, if someone were to say no to that, if they were to refuse that, you would naturally, of course, find that extremely suspicious.
I I agree. There's definitely something not quite right about that in that regard. I think it leaves open the possibility that the bells may indeed still exist somewhere, or may have been melted down, and the spirit lives on within another item.
It is entirely possible. Bell metal is, as I understand it, a special material, but it contains considerable amounts of brass and therefore copper. It is quite valuable, I'm told.
And if pipes were running through a building using that, perhaps the whole building would hum with the tune at all times. Could you imagine?
Something that would be easy to ascertain were I given access to the building and possibly were wise enough to bring a small, easily concealed hammer with me.
It's true. How has your application to the fish mongers guild been going recently?
I, I've um, I've been told that in order for my application to be processed with any expediency, I have to demonstrate some actual fishmongering.
Oh.
Apparently, the easily concealable hammer is not enough.
It's a shame because it's a
Um,
very nice hammer that you have that you'd love
it,
to be able to
it's
carry.
it's a truly beautiful hammer. Yes.
So, Rick, as we look into the tale of the Silent Spire for what it is, um, we've done research into it. We have the paperwork. We have the poem, which is a wonderful poem. We have tales of hit the bells inside and not outside. The harmony um, once the bells have been stolen. Um, strange happenings of evenings and such like. Many things. Yeah, as we always talk about, there's side stories that don't quite fit. That sometimes you have to sift through to get to the real meat of the matter.
Hmm.
Um,
Absolutely.
but overall, with the central point of the Silent Spire, where do you stand? Are you convinced, or do you remain sceptical?
Well, on the one hand, the story seems beguiling and enticing, and the simple simplicity of how to test whether or not it was true. You could have literally walked up to the church any time and tested it for yourself. Makes me desperate to believe it. However, it does seem a little bit convenient that the
Mm.
myth was only known to those in the local community. It does seem a little bit convenient that just when people start to get really interested in it, there is there is a sudden fire, and then the bells are lost forever. It seems.
Mm.
Um, Now, normally, when I find that the evidence is gone, I see conspiracy
Hmm.
or an attempt to hide this, but this seems the wrong way round. It's too obviously public an event, but too hard to investigate. So I think until the spire is rebuilt, I will remain skeptical.
And of course, when it is rebuilt, you'll be on the first bus there.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is going to be a very, very exciting thing to be there and listen to the bells inside the church and then step outside and see what happens.
In fact, I've already organised a renting a gazebo for a Truth Foragers get together on the green, the Fletcham Green. It'll be a wonderful day.
Fantastic.
I look forward to it.
I think that's an absolutely wonderful idea.
I'm putting in a
Yes.
slot for your recorder playing as well, so we can. Yes.
Yes, and Fletcham is, of course, convenient to get to by train because, as you know, it has trains that run into Victoria, Liverpool Street, and Paddington.
It's an incredible rail network around there. It's for
It
such a
really
small
is.
village. I myself, I was I was leaning on belief for a long, long time. It must be said. I was really drawn to it. There was a couple of things that swayed me slightly away. I think one of them, for me, was that finally looking through records of church attendance, that church attendance had dropped uh, in the uh, in the months leading up to the tale coming out, and it looks like it's possible the vicar uh, jingled things around a little bit to draw people in to listen to bells, to get them into the building again. You can only hear the bells if you're in, and I think that might have become a bigger part of the story. So ultimately, like you, as much as I want to believe, this time, and it's rare for me, I must remain skeptical.
Yes. Yes, it just seems not quite there, Not quite.
Not quite. Well, already half spliced in chat believes, but legitimate remains skeptical. So a mix, but mostly it seems that most of us are skeptical on this one. I would ultimately agree. I'm looking forward to the day out. If nothing else, it'll be a wonderful time of recorder playing and flicking through old faxes and blurry pictures. And I'm looking forward to watching the Flake advert with you in person a few times.
Yes, as you know, I have it to hand in every available format.
It's good because I've heard the video format is starting to wear out a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit. It's old analog magnetic tape. It's a natural function of time and use.
Exactly. Well, that's the Silent Spire. Um, the next one is one that is very close to my heart. Um, for both of us, really, we're both meat eaters. Um, we carefully source our meat. I get most of my food, of course, from the petrol station, but when I eat meat, I'm very specific about it. I know you're a big fan too. You hunt a little bit for yours, though, don't you? When need to, you forage for meat as well as truth.
When the opportunity presents itself, I do indeed. I wish I could do it more often, um, but uh, but I'm not a particularly skilled hunter, so I'm forced to rely on things like traps and small explosive charges to do the work for me. And there aren't that many places where you can do that without getting arrested these days.
This this has gone mad, hasn't it? It's such a shame. Um, and your freeman of the land argument seems to hold no weight these days.
No, I think that there were. legitimate arguments that you could make in this country, but uh, people on the internet have started following these sovereign citizen people in America and trying to use their arguments, and it's rather spoilt the apple barrel for all of us because everyone seems to assume that's what you're talking about, whereas of course you're not talking about arcane American historic laws, but something much more rooted in sensible reality,
Mm,
just not widely accepted as being law.
mm, exactly. Arcane British law.
Yeah, well, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
well, yeah. So, talking of meat, the next myth we're looking at this evening is the myth of the nomadic butcher.
Who appears to have the same. Ah, no, there he goes. Right, the nomadic butcher. Well, this one's something you brought to my attention. Um, well, a few years ago now, when we were discussing exactly what we've just been discussing. You know, how we source our food and make sure that it is as low as possible in any any artificially created chemicals
Mm,
or anything that could be used to trace us or identify our location. Um, the the classic example, obviously, being the fact that I don't know if you're aware of this, but um, people who indulge in eating biscuits or cookies, as they call them in the United States, can actually be tracked from place to place by the government and, in some cases, corporate entities by the cookies that they've digested.
mm.
Um, Now, obviously, we would never be foolish enough to eat such things, but there are worries in a number of other areas, and certainly meat is among them. But when we were discussing it, you did bring to me this rather remarkable story, which, if I remember correctly, is from Lincolnshire, isn't it?
It is. It's a place I've travelled to on a number of times, and during one of my evenings out, I was sat in a cafe, carefully grinding down the biscuits that I'd been bought and sifting through, putting them through my pocket sieve to make sure anything of any size was sifted out, of course, as is a good habit to get into.
It is.
Um, and an elderly gentleman came over and, in hushed terms, mentioned that he'd heard of me before and shared this tale with me, the nomadic butcher. Um, he himself had not experienced the nomadic butcher. That would be too simple, like you say, too clean, too unbelievable. But from his childhood, he told of a tale that was told around this parts. It was a time after the war where people were able to return more and more to the supermarket. It was that just as more packaged goods were available, whereas before, of course, you had gone to get your meat, your cheese, your butter folded up nicely in a piece of greaseproof paper or something, but packaged food was coming in, and people were nervous of, as you say, this food, and there was a sudden resurgence of traveling butchers, traveling cake makers, um, traveling potato peddlers across
Mhm.
Lincolnshire. And one man in particular travelled around the locale, the nomadic butcher, and he was very well known, Rick.
And you'd expect him to be in Lincolnshire, particularly a place famous for its sausages.
Mm.
Um, and I believe the Lincolnshire sausage is a secret recipe handed down from father to son and mother to daughter. Um, and if you ever get to try one, I can tell you they are delicious, absolutely delicious. Um, though you have to make sure, of course, that they do come from Lincolnshire. I've seen people advertising Lincolnshire sausages that don't in fact come from there, which is, well, disturbing, honestly.
Well,
Um,
well, to be honest, as we both know, if it had been a Lincolnshire sausage from that period, it was perhaps better. that it hadn't come from Lincolnshire because
If
of
it
what the
came from
of what the
the
rumours
nomadic
were.
butcher, yes,
Yeah, exactly.
yes, indeed. So it does it does appear that while he did make sausages in Lincolnshire, his recipe, even if it was handed down to him by his father, may not have been much like anyone else's idea of what should go into a Lincolnshire sausage. Um, and I mean, I'm pretty sure what everyone's thinking right now is actually quite accurate. It is always a little bit of a surprise if you find a nomadic butcher, someone who doesn't seem to operate from any kind of address and comes and goes at will. He he would turn up and in markets and just take over the a spare pitch where which hadn't been occupied that week for whatever reason, and he would sell his wares. And
Mm.
apparently, people found his food delicious, but distinctive, shall we
Mm.
say? It was not quite what they were expecting, and as the story goes, he kept this traveling process for what 10 years or something before eventually vanishing.
It was a surprisingly long time. He never stayed too long in any one place, and as you say, he'd turn up with his pitch, sell his wares for 10 years locally, which is astonishing in many ways because he would leave his village, the village, and it would be maybe a day or two later that people would notice. To start with, for the first few months as he travelled and he was welcomed around the villages, people would then notice that there maybe a chicken or two had gone missing, then a pig, and at the time, post-war, people were very relied a lot on local meats, but they put it down to outsiders coming in, stealing the meat, or animals wandering off and dying. But as the months turned to years, the the what went missing became a bit more sinister, as there was a spate of children going missing, Rick,
Hmm.
after the nomadic butcher had left.
It, I think that certainly began to make more than a few local tongues wag. The butcher would come into town, he would sell his sausages, and he would go, and then there would be one or two local scallywags who couldn't be found again. Um, Often children who were left unsupervised or who roamed freely away from public spaces, who were known for wandering through farmers' fields and the like.
Hmm.
And yes, when people started to look into it, they started to realize that there was what they believed was an emerging pattern of where he had been and where these children disappeared to
Hmm.
or from. And that's a terrible, well, it's a terrible thought. Um, it's awful to think that there could be such an evil character out there. Though thankfully, I mean, this is many years ago, of
Hmm.
course.
Of course. It's, the thing was that as rumours spread and sort of mutterings, people would try and find where the nomadic butcher was going next, but he never made it clear. And he always seemed to turn up in towns and villages that weren't expecting him and weren't ready for him. But rumours got back from people who'd gone to market to sell their wares that maybe every now and again they'd seen one of the children helping the butcher as an assistant. They'd seen the butcher with an assistant. No one can be certain. A child that looked like that stray. Um, Sometimes some would say they'd seen one of the children camping out in the woods, or um, could have sworn blind they'd seen them uh, in the paths as they were walking back drunk from the pub.
Mm.
And that stopped it from being an absolute certainty in people's eyes, I think, these so-called sightings.
Um, there is. there is some question as to the accuracy of individual eye testimony. I mean, you and I know, and so do the courts, thankfully, that witness statements by actual um, human beings who see them with their own eyes should always be considered the highest possible standard of evidence.
Hmm.
Um, Everything else, DNA, fingerprints, you name it, is susceptible to corruption and authoritarian interference, attacks by the supernatural, attacking everything from filing systems and databases to the actual genetics of the person. But what you see with your eyes, you can believe in most cases. Um, and yet, even at the time, back when eyewitness testimony was considered, as it still is, thankfully, pretty much the top end
Hmm.
of evidentiary gathering. Um, People were sometimes not listened to, I think, as carefully as they should have been in these matters. And sometimes it is, as you say, because they might have been drunk or far away, or it was the
Hmm.
middle of the night, or in one or two cases, they were using it as an alibi for why they weren't
Hmm.
somewhere else at that time. Um, so, in those instances, it is easy to look down on that kind of testimony, especially once the story starts to get around, if you see what I mean. Because, as we know, nothing does the movement more harm than those who make up fake stories of the
Well,
supernatural.
it's if I had my way, they would be banned from any forum that they could share such falsities. It's a very This is a very noble and important profession that you and I follow and should be treated in such a way.
It is, as some have said, a calling.
It truly is, and you must follow the calling wherever it takes you. Rick, did you see? I know I sent you a lot of paperwork on this. From the direction I went in, I started trying to chase landowners at the time. If you remember the paperwork I sent you,
Hmm.
because I thought that if anyone was going to track what had been purchased at the time, it wasn't the housewife, um, rushing from J.R. Sainsbury's to here and there and stopping for a sausage or two, but it would be those who sent people to shop that wanted a record of what had been bought. Um, and there were some shopping lists and some reports of what was sent back that went far beyond sausages, Rick.
Yes, yes. I mean, obviously, for reasons that should be obvious, people certainly talked about sausages a great deal, but um, this particular butcher apparently had a line in pies, chops, ribs, cutlets, and steaks. Um, and people even purchased quite um, unusually small portions of offal, as I understand it.
At the time, I suppose that because you had that mix of coming out of the war, meat being rare, and that quite right suspicion of packaged food, um, uh, people would have been excited to take on relatively cheap meat, Rick, without too many questions asked at the time. And do you think that's what helped him stay one step ahead?
I suppose that's possible. I also think there's a reason why the word unthinkable is used the way it is. Um, you walk up to a friendly, smiling, efficient looking butcher, and what are you going to think when he
Hmm.
offers you sausages? I mean, there are some things we do not turn our minds to without a great deal of prompting,
Hmm.
and almost nobody would look down at that meat and spot anything particularly different. Um, I I mean, we do have records from people saying that his pies in particular were considered absolutely exceptional.
Mm. I believe one of the local football teams started bought a whole batch to start selling at their games for a short time.
As I understand it, it may actually be the origin outside London of pies being sold at football grounds because apparently they were extremely popular, especially with visiting teams from the north.
Indeed, it's it sends a shudder down your spine to think that so many people may have ended up eating suspicious meat unknowingly.
And obviously, anyone who did, there is no blame attached to them.
No.
I'm sure, purchased this in good faith. Um, though you do have to ask, given how quickly the rumors started to appear within the first year or two,
Mm.
um, it does seem a little bit odd that he managed to sell his wares in the same locality for another 8 years.
Mm.
So maybe there are one or two people who were keeping him in business with intention, shall we say?
Especially as of course, we're very fortunate that from that time there are some blurry photographs that were taken of market stalls
Mm.
to show the hustle and bustle of these upcoming villages, I suppose. Um, and we've seen photos, both of us, of what people have circled in the classic red ink of what
Mm.
they say is the nomadic butcher. And we've seen them from the very early 50s through to the very early 60s.
Mm.
And he's wearing exactly the same outfit. So there must have been someone keeping him going, as it were, because otherwise he would
Uh,
surely have been.
yes, you have to think that he had loyal customers. So the question becomes, to what extent did they know what they were getting when they placed their order? Remember, this is a part of the country that is quite dangerously close to Norfolk,
Hmm.
and some unsettling things have certainly happened there.
It's true, perhaps in other parts of the country it may have come to an end much sooner.
Perhaps, yes, and I suspect it would have been it would have been localized in terms of his culinary selection as well. He sold sausages and meat pies in Lincolnshire, but had he had Cornwall as his stamping ground, I suspect it would have been pasties.
Oh, I can imagine that now. Um, you looked more towards, as while I looked towards the beginning of the tale, you look more towards the later years. Were there any sightings post 1961 around Lincolnshire or nearby?
There were not, not in that locality. What is interesting, however, is there came a point where there was sufficient interest, particularly among the authorities. I wish I could say it was the police who took the lead on this, but but a certain amount of the information I have implies that it was more local individuals talking to sort of local government officers, trading standards, and people like that, food safety people, who principally took the lead. Um, so when eventually things got too hot, he seemingly disappeared. But as I say, that's just in the area around Lincolnshire. It didn't take me very long to identify that from about 1962, for another 5 years at least, there appears to have been a little commonality with a case in Suffolk.
Hmm.
And then there was something of a gap, but in the mid 1970s, um, Cambridgeshire appeared to become the centre of a similar case. Now, sadly, I have not been able to identify any photographs from those, so I cannot confirm it's the same individual.
Of course.
But the stories do seem remarkably similar,
Mm.
truthfully.
And of course, from the 80s, he could well have become a Conservative MP dealing in the misfortune of children.
It, I mean, it would be frankly surprising if he hadn't.
Indeed, indeed. What I find fascinating about the Medic Butcher, and I'm sure you'll agree, is we both of us love a strong period of time. A start and a finish with a few whispers afterwards is a wonderful thing for Truth Foragers. It gives
It,
you enough
yes,
evidence to get your nose into, to snuffle around in. Blurry photos, which I know make you very excited, Rick.
it's how you know they're real.
Mm. And a lot of word of mouth, which again is a wonderful thing.
It's fantastic. Yes, absolutely. It makes it so much easier to sift through to find the core elements, because when the story's been repeated enough times by enough different people, the edges of the detail change, but you suddenly find that there's one thing that all of those retellings agree on, and that's the thing you need.
It's a wonderful thing. So before we go into our break, I'm just going to put the important little bit of music in before we start. So bear with me. Uh, Rick Bishop, in the tale of the nomadic butcher, travelling his way through Lincolnshire in the 1950s, um, taking and selling the meat of children to unsuspecting people. Do you believe or do you remain sceptical?
It's absolutely clear to me. This is undeniably true. There is nothing that could shake me from it. I absolutely believe this. It's it's simply obvious. It not only makes matches with the testimony of the time, but it also makes perfect sense.
Oh, and for those watching, whether you're regular forager or you're new, remember to send back your DNA kits, please, so we can prove that it's you. Um, for Rick to be so certain is a rarity, and he's got every right to be, because I also believe. I think everything ties to there being such a character in Lincolnshire in the 1950s. I think it'd be hard to think otherwise. Chat, we'll give you a moment if you wish to decide whether you believe or you remain sceptical. I see already half Spliced has already suggested that he also believes. And I can't see why not, quite frankly. It would be ridiculous not to. I think of all the evidence we've brought over the months that we've been allowed to stream here, I think it holds very strongly, Rick. Very, very strongly.
Yes, I'd be surprised if there wasn't a significant majority in favour of believing on this one.
Absolutely. And those listening um, on repeat, I believe the Boys and the Baltic Star put these on YouTube now and even start breaking them apart separately as well, which is wonderful of them. They've been so good to us. Um, but I suppose we should leave them a nice comfy break here so that they can split the videos up again in the future.
I think it's only fair.
Rick, it's at this time where I always need to refill my glass and empty my bladder, and I'm sure you are the same. And you, dear Truth Foragers, we're going to return shortly for two more, including next up something, Rick, that you spent years looking into. I'm very excited to hear your wisdom.
Okay, we will look forward to that.
Wonderful. I'll do the best I can. I looked into it a bit as well, but oh, this is a wonderful thing that Rick brought to me. So, dear viewers, please wait with us. Feel free to do what you need to do, but please come back in 5 to 10 minutes and enjoy the second part of tonight's Truth Foragers. It's a pleasure, as always, to have you with us.
like it was meant to be. We said we rule the world, just you and me. It hurts so hard. It hurts so
Good evening, everyone, and welcome back. It's a treat to have you here. I've clicked on the wrong thing. There it is. Um, Welcome back to the Truth Foragers with me, Dickie Wagwan, and my long-term friend, associate, and fellow forager, snuffler, Rick Bishop. Good evening, Rick. I think that we need to make ourselves more approachable to the audience. So, if you could briefly to bring levity, I know you're against levity in such proceedings, but
I hunt it out and destroy it wherever I find it.
could you name um, your five favourite types of evidence for when we're foraging?
5 favorite types of evidence.
The thing that you
Okay.
get most out of.
Well, in no particular order.
But I'd like to veto Darcy Bustle video recordings. I know that would have been at the top, but I want to make you think a little bit harder.
Right. Okay. Well, then, my favorite types of evidence. First of all, obviously, word of mouth, rumor,
Of course.
and the quiet tales told in dark corners of public houses, particularly. Um, I find I visit a great many pubs and
Part of the
end
job.
up. It is, and so that form of information gathering I find particularly valuable. Um, the second form of evidence that I like is found in arcane archives and basements. I'm a great believer in researching in books that are especially dusty or ancient. Um, and I find that if there's a thick layer of dust, it simply means that I'm on a path that very few have trodden before, and that means I'm onto something.
Which is saying something
Um,
considering you're so brutally allergic and have bad hay fever.
um, yes, it's something that I've fought against my whole life and struggled with, but I feel the truth is always worth the sacrifice.
Hmm.
My third would obviously be photographic evidence,
Oh.
particularly photographs that are old and are clearly um, real. And you can
Mm.
usually tell they're real because they're not staged. The staged photograph has the property of being sharp and well lit and well constructed. But show me a picture that is
Ooh.
slightly blurry, slightly underdeveloped, and the actual object you're looking for is only just in the corner of the frame, and I find that
Mm.
very convincing.
Oh yes.
Then, of course, we have to move into the modern era at some point. The internet, an absolute mine of truth and pure analytical reason, which has transformed the work. To be honest, you can almost get to the point where you can just type, say, 2 or 3 words into almost random words into a search engine, and before you know it, you're off on the hunt of some new
Oh,
story. It's
wonderful.
remarkable, actually, how well that works. Um, and if I'm forced to pick number 5, and I can't pick videos of the glorious Miss Bustle, then it's going to have to be um, what I would call signals intelligence. The
Mm.
suspicious noises and telephones, the creaks and groans of an old house. It's the sense you get when you're somewhere that there is something here that isn't fully understood yet. It's very enticing and it draws you in. I think that's probably the most entertaining part of the journey for me,
The barking of dogs in the background of a stream.
and especially if the dog does not bark.
Oh, especially. Well, I think that's made us both, and especially you, seem much more approachable, and I think much more. I don't know, down with the young truth foragers among.
Well, hopefully so, because
you have a lot to learn.
it is important that what we do is act as communicators and get these vital pieces of information out there. The more approachable we are, the better we're doing that job, I feel.
And it's important to pass these skills down to the younger generations, and that's why our fanzine and any information is always sent out by fax. For those of you that join the Truth Foragers, the group, fax, and Rick Bishop likes to leave his on a shelf for a couple of years before sending them out, so that they have the dust, which goes in the envelope with them, I believe.
Absolutely, it's an important tactile part of the experience. And I find actually one of the more effective ways of communicating is to leave cryptic messages tucked between the lesser used reference books in distant public libraries.
Oh, that is good. If someone's meant to find them, they'll find them.
Exactly.
Um, I'm very excited about this third um, urban myth this evening because it's one that Rick Bishop has spent 15 years, not the whole time, but on and off of his life, 15 years looking into. I don't think this is the hat in question. I had to, I just found something easy on the internet. I typed 3 words, as Rick Bishop likes to say. Um, this is the myth that I've been trying to get into over the last few months of the unlosable hat, Rick Bishop. Please, I'm so excited. Please tell us more.
So the story goes back centuries. However, obviously, the further back you go, the fewer and fewer the records become. Um, so, broadly speaking, the tale is indeed of a person who has a hat. Now, the hat, it turns out, doesn't seem to have any unusual properties. It's an appropriate hat for that person. It's one they may have picked or bought or inherited or been given as a gift. It's just a hat. The typical hat um, is suited to the style of the time and the place in which it happened. So, um, it might, for example, be a baseball cap, or or it might be a woolly football supporter's hat. It could be a number of different forms. But what is remarkable about this hat is that it is a homing hat. Once you have it in your possession, it is, it seems, impossible to lose. But it's more than that. It doesn't only, you know, not get lost, it returns to its owner's head.
Mm.
So, in the a number of occasions, people's first experience of this are where they would sort of take the hat off and throw it carelessly onto a piece of furniture at bedtime, and then wake in the morning with the hat back on their head, which is, let's be honest, a little bit unusual.
Mm, mm.
And in some cases, of course, people would naturally assume this was something that their wife had done, or something like that. But plenty of people lived alone, or their spouse would swear that they hadn't done that. Their children would swear they hadn't done that. So the story begins there. But it has a much darker side. And the darker side um, is in terms of what um, what brought it to my attention. So the first instance I had of this was of a rather hastily written and scratchily noted report from a police investigator. It seems that in the late 1700s, a person had been killed, had died, and possibly by foul means. The the fact that they'd been attacked wasn't clear at the time they died, and shortly after they were buried, the um, the the local coroner asked for the body to be exhumed again so it could be examined more thoroughly. And during that time, injuries were found on the body, but also it appeared odd to the coroner that the body had been buried wearing a hat, but not a sort of formal hat, as wouldn't have been uncommon in those days, just a day hat. And he remarked upon this in his original note. And then, on speaking to the family, it appears that in fact their poor deceased relative had not been buried in the hat at all.
Hmm.
The hat had been left on a hat stand in the hall of the house, and then suddenly it was gone. Nobody knew where it went, and it turns out it was in the coffin. Now everyone swore that this was completely impossible, and the coroner's examination of this, that piece of evidence went far beyond the evidence that he was able to find about the foul play of the murder. It fascinated him, as you can imagine.
Of course. Um, of all the cases you looked into, Rick, starting from this very bleak case, let's face it, um, was all the return of the hat? Was it always to someone who was unconscious or asleep or deceased, as it were, or did anyone feel its return while conscious?
As far as I'm aware, there are no instances of a person um, seeing the hat come back to them while they were awake. But there are a number of stories of evidence of exactly how the hat was coming back to them, because some of those are gruesome indeed. It appears that at the relevant moment it decides to move, the hat moves in as short a path as it possibly can
Mm-hmm.
from where it is to where it needs to be. And that appears to be true even if it's currently being worn by someone else, or being transported by someone else, or if it has to injure someone else to get there. Um, there have been some absolutely gruesome findings with hats that were uh, tied on under the chin, had straps and things like that holding them in place that were apparently unlosable, and hat owners have awoken to find that the the recently deceased wearer is now lying next to them in the bed with bones broken and skin flayed off, so the hat can get as close as possible to its owner's head. Um, and I have this is one of those ones where I've seen a truly remarkable example of this. Not quite that gruesome, it has to be said, but I went to visit the family of a man who claimed to have an unlosable hat. That he almost treated it like a trick. He would throw it in the river off the bridge on the way home from the pub, and then in the morning it would be back on his head. You know, he thought it was a neat party game. But I think you have to be very careful messing with things this powerful. Anyway, he died, and one of the conditions of his will was that his hat should be locked in a safe in his study. Um, and so I went to visit the family, and they were kind enough to open the safe, and the hat wasn't there, which made me wonder, where on earth had it gone? Well, it wasn't very long before we got to the slightly less savory topic of what actually happened after the man's death, and I was directed to a fairly smart metal urn on the mantelpiece containing his ashes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and after a little bit of convincing, his widow opened the lid of the urn, and curled up inside on top of the ashes was indeed the unlosable hat. She offered to let me take it with me, but I pointed out that it would seem rather ridiculous. I doubt I would keep it more than a night, and and it might injure me in an attempt to get away from me. Um, so I told her it was probably safer where it was, and it should stay on as close as it can get to his head.
There's there's two main questions, I guess. As you sent me your research from this, of course, we share our research before streams so that we can make sure that we can look into it each other, so we have uh, suitable commentary for both of us. The two main questions that I'd like us both to look into, and these are two that I've looked into a bit as well with it, are I'm sure the viewers would be interested. Number one, if the hat is destroyed in any way, does it remain destroyed?
Hmm.
And number two is, can the ownership of the hat pass on to someone else? And I know that you've looked into both, and I've started looking into both, but I follow on from your superior research, Rick.
The second one abundantly appears to be true. If the hat is given by its owner to another person, and that person accepts it and then wears it, which I think is important, then it does seem that the hat will transfer its allegiance. Yes.
So you
And
could have ended up the owner of an unlosable hat if you had taken up the widow's offer.
on the assumption that she was empowered to gift it to me,
Of
because it isn't
course.
entirely clear whether the original owner has to be the one making the gift.
Could it be willed? Could it be put in the will, perhaps, to pass on to the
I'm,
wife?
I mean, it's possible, but in my experience, supernatural elements usually don't follow the strict rule of law.
It's a very
Normally,
good
they
point.
have a different version of reality that they adhere to.
You're much better with the supernatural than me, Rick. Always has been. It's definitely a strength of yours.
As for destroying the hat, I know of cases where the hat has not been destroyed on purpose, but must have come very close to it. Situations where it's blown off in a wind and been thrown into a piece of farm machinery, for example. And on those instances, it seems to come back undamaged. Um, Whether it is in fact possible to destroy one, if you wanted to, I do not know. I haven't encountered anyone who's tried, I think is the clearest way to put it.
Do you Did you see the clip from the old Esther Ranson show from the early 80s, where there was the person on there that claimed that they had an unlosable hat? Did you see that? But it was a very battered. It looked battered and torn somewhat, and the tale they told didn't quite fit. Do you poo-poo that tale?
Well, I looked at it, of course, because, as you can imagine, magazine shows from the 1980s, with their outstanding reputation for research
Mm,
accuracy,
mm.
have always been a fertile ground for the foraging of truth. But on this instance, I can't quite shake the feeling that it would have been very easy for them to test the thesis, and yet they said they hadn't, which I find very strange, frankly.
The other clip for me was in the old police show, the old crime watchers show, where they would recreate. It seemed like they made fun of a hat returning on a bit of string. It felt
Hmm.
very sour in my mouth, as that was someone that sounded like they had been killed by the returning hat. Did you look into that case?
Um, I did look into that case, and the police records, had, I think, rather missed the point, if you know what I mean. There was actually some good follow up after they caught the individual,
Hmm.
um, because this individual was apparently the owner of an unlosable hat. And what they found interesting was that when he was eventually convicted of the crime, because nobody believed in an unlosable hat being the cause of the death. He was sent to prison, and his personal belongings were taken away from him, including his unlosable hat, leading to some quite remarkable reports that every morning when people got to his cell, he would be wearing the hat again. And they took it away and put it in lockers. They took it away and sent it back to his home address. They tried all sorts of things, and yet it kept coming. What I find particularly disturbing about this case, of course, is that he did in fact serve more than 20 years in prison, despite the fact it was pretty obvious he was the owner of an unlosable hat, something he had relied upon in his defense, and the jury simply did not accept.
It's tough, isn't it? It's tough in that regard. They sometimes miss the wood for the trees, as it were.
And this is a problem, of course, that we all run the risk of every day of our lives. That something completely unexpected that seems obvious to us, but others might find difficulty believing. Um, we've discussed this ourselves in the past. You know, if something was to happen um, to you or I, and when we were explaining that story to a jury, should we ever find ourselves in front of one, um, how many of those jurors would come to believe our version of events, given how hard it can be to open people's eyes to the truth?
And I think they would look very badly on the little hammer that you're trying to carry around.
I, I suspect you're probably right. And though I can obviously explain it completely rationally,
Mm.
it's
Oh,
probably
absolutely.
something that will be hard to explain to a juror.
Uh, it's tough. The law is an ass, as they say. I have one more question for you. 'Cause this one's going to be interesting to me because this is very, very modern. And for all your strengths, Rick Bishop, you're not a man of the youth of the modern. That's what it falls on me. As I say, you even poo-pooed facts for a very long time.
Hmm.
Um, you can't just send dusty tomes to people, when you need a quick response. I know you'd love to, but sometimes you need quicker. Have you heard of TikTok, Rick?
The sound a clock makes.
It's a it's an app that the youth like to send videos to each other for. It's what the videos that I sent you were from TikTok, so you have seen them, but I purposefully copied them across to VHS for you. It was
Ah,
yeah, those ones, yeah. Um, there was a sorry, I'm terribly sorry. There was a movement last year of youth on TikTok where they would in their 30-second videos where they would have a hat, um, throw the hat away, do something very visible like post it or something like that, and then the next day show the same hat, and then the next clip would show them passing it on to a friend who would then TikTok their experiences the same, where the hat comes back, pass it on to their friend. It became a bit of a viral hit. There was I believe there was a Katy Perry song playing in the background and some twerking or something. But that's TikTok. I kept that in for you because I thought you'd appreciate that. But
I did wonder where you'd found that particular collation.
indeed, like, what do you think? Do you think there's anything? Do you think it was set up, or do you think that the unlosable hat still exists today? Are they messing with dangerous things?
Either the hat is genuine, in which case I think their frivolity on the subject is unwarranted and possibly extremely hazardous. Um, that certainly is possible. But the other thing, of course, is this is not a widely known story, but it is one that a handful of people have heard about over the years. So it is entirely possible that whoever started this particular um, chain letter of supernatural doom um, may have may have heard of the story or been told it at some point, and without being silly about it, it would be relatively easy to recreate that sequence by just having a set of identical hats.
And that's it, isn't it? At the end of the day, I believe the youth do anything for what they call clout. Um, they don't know what they're messing with, unfortunately, Rick, and that's where our need to educate comes in.
It is sometimes dangerous, and I'm aware that my insistence on making most of my communications encrypted may also be hampering our message getting out as fast or as widely as it could. But it is important to me that things are that there is an effort involved in finding a truth. Otherwise, it feels cheap.
But then, to be honest, I'm sure watching the videos with the way the youth were speaking felt encrypted to you. It felt like a work to get the result.
Well, now that I know that those videos were constructed on some strange application platform used by youths for their own forms of subtle and arcane communication, I'm feeling much more warm towards it. Actually,
It feels right up your alley. I'll get you signed up to it, Rick.
it
Um,
it it, it sounds perfect.
you can reach a lot of people through that. Okay.
Mm.
So I'm going to put the sound up there. So bear with me for a second, everyone. Rick Bishop, in the case of the unlovable hat, the unlosable hat, it's lovable, the unlosable hat, and your 15 years of research, do you believe, or after 15 years, do you still remain skeptical?
I would undoubtedly have been willing to work for 15 years on something that still eluded my belief. But on this occasion, I didn't have to. I've seen elements of it play out with my own eyes, and I absolutely believe in the unlosable hat.
I'm I'm not surprised, Rick Bishop. I'm not surprised. I've never seen you more caught up in your work than in the unlosable hat, and I'm dragged along by it. It must be said. Of anyone I know, you are the one who can make a blind man see, as it were. And I also believe in the unlosable hat. And I've not tried to get rid of mine, and I'm worried. I've not taken it off in a year and a half since you've told me about it, because I'm worried what might befall me or others if I do so, in case it is indeed an unlosable hat. Already half spliced also believes, which is unsurprising, really. He's very believing, Rick Bishop, I've noticed.
It seems to be having a night like that.
You get these nights. Some nights they all come up. They all come up blackjack, don't they? At the end of the day.
It's something mathematicians point to and say it's a function of randomness. But you and I know there's no such thing as randomness.
Of course, a fallacy indeed. There is one thing that is definitely never random, Rick, and that's that we end every episode on a local myth. So my favourite part of the night, it must be said.
Yes, a local story. It's a good one. And this one, of course, you brought up to me. I wasn't aware of it until you mentioned it.
I'm very much surprised that you didn't, because it's a local tale, and it involves pubs. It's right up your alley, and so I was quite shocked. I'm going to put some music on for this one because I'm feeling so special about it. And it is the tale of the landlord's daughter, Rick Bishop. I don't think this is her. I just had to find a suitable piece. But it's a local tale that has really come into being in the last 15 to 20 years. It's quite a modern tale, Rick. So perhaps it's past your heyday of heavy drinking and hell raising.
I think my days of hell raising may be past, but I think I'm just coming to a peak in the heavy drinking.
Indeed, maybe you're spending too much time focusing on what's in the glass and and not on who's serving you, perhaps.
It's possible. It's certainly possible.
After 14 ales, all two-eyed creatures look the same, after all.
there is a point where you start to lose what you might call absolute objectivity. Yes. So tell us, how did you get involved with the tale of the landlord's daughter?
So the landlord's daughter is a tale that I picked up from drinking just outside our town. Actually, there's, as you know, there's a few villages around, and for drivers, if you're not in the town, you're of course limited to how much you drink because you and I, Rick, we break the law in many ways, but when it comes to drink driving, of course, we do not.
We would never put other people in potential danger.
Breaking and entering, yes. Use of a small hammer in unexpected spaces, yes. Stealing videotapes of Darcy Bustle, yes.
These are either essential things to overcome, frankly, unacceptable barriers to our work, or in some cases, are civil disobedience, something which I think we both believe there's not enough of.
Quite right too. Quite right. I think people have fallen flat on that. They need to look more into some of the old. Maybe we should do a whole episode on cases that would lead to civil disobedience. We spent a long time in a yurt poring over paperwork from the olden days about that. But the landlord's daughter, going back to modern days, I was in a pub in a local village, and I was admiring the horse brasses on the wall. It was lovely. The fire was roaring, and these two old gentlemen with three teeth between them were whistling on about how there was a tale of a landlord's daughter who had died in her pomp in her early to mid-20s. She'd been known, not in that pub, but in a pub in a nearby village that was long closed, had been converted into apartments.
Mhm.
The gardens converted into more apartments. An old people's home built next door, as you would.
Of course.
But that she'd died in suspicious circumstances. And yet it was believed that those that were drinking there, especially when lock-ins were much more popular, when the doors were locked and bolted, the curtains were pulled, and the regulars were allowed to stay for an extra hour or two to beat licensing, that often drunk, sleepy, they would find that their last pint of the night would be poured by the landlord's daughter.
Mhm.
And Rick, you're a man who's enjoyed many lock-in,
Indeed.
who has stared bleary-eyed over a pint at the person pouring a final drink. In your research, did you find much to support this claim?
Well, obviously, once you brought it to my attention, I immediately drank in every pub extensively.
You're a professional. Research is all. You're all about research.
It's a critical part of what we do. There are occasions where what we do has led me to stand in a rainstorm in the middle of a field for hours on end. And those have not
Drinking.
been great days.
Yeah, but you've been
But
drinking.
there have been occasions where it's sent me to a pub.
Yeah, exactly. Or many pubs.
Many pubs, yes. So I couldn't be absolutely certain because I wasn't familiar with all of the pubs I was in. Only the 6 or 7 where I drink all the time would I know the staff by sight. You understand?
Of course, of course. There's such a turnover these days.
There is. So as a consequence, I couldn't be absolutely certain, but I would have to err on the side of saying that I didn't myself experience this phenomenon. But what I was particularly interested in was when I started talking to people about it in these various pubs, they certainly didn't seem to find anything particularly alarming in a ghost who pours them a pint. I think of all of the ghostly activities, that's one that we can all get behind. But they were very interested in, as you rightly say, her suspicious death. So did you learn anything about exactly how she died?
I looked into it more. It took, as with you, I like to take research seriously, especially when it comes to pubs. And so I returned to that pub a dozen, two, 3 dozen more times to collaborate their stories. They weren't always in there, so I had to wait until closing. But on the times they were, I finally struck up a conversation and asked around a bit more. Um, and although they were coy to start with, of course, when I was an outsider, they did indeed share with me the mysterious cases surrounding her death.
Yeah.
And it turns out that her death, no one saw her actually die, and no one that they'd spoken to had actually seen her body. That it was very much a case of word of mouth. The apparently the landlord's wife had seen the body, but the landlord's wife wasn't around anymore. She'd moved away. Um, so no one had actually seen the landlord's daughter die or her body after dying. It says that she died in a. The word is that she died in a freak accident, changing the barrel
Interesting.
of a very fizzy German lager.
Ah, yes.
There was a terror. They were quite vague on the details, but there might have been some sort of build up of pressure and something unfortunate within that.
It's a pretty horrible thought. Lager. Not something I indulge in myself, of course. But yes, not a good way to die either.
No, indeed, but we say die. There's no one. It was just all hearsay. Her death was reported in the local papers and newsletters on local news because it's a tragedy. Someone in their mid to 24, I guess, 23, 24,
Mm.
dying in a pub is unexpected and it makes the news. And so there was mourning. There was definitely a funeral, um, and yet it took, from what I could see, the first date of her pouring a pint in spectral form potentially was 3.5 months later.
That's interesting. That's an unusual. Uh, in the business, for those who aren't familiar, we call it the refractory period.
Mm,
The amount of time between a person's death and the first evidence of their unlife continuing.
mm.
That's a very short refractory period.
Yeah, that's 14 weeks is, as we know, within the world of the spirits. Not that we delve too deeply into that, but within the world of the spirits, the number 14 is quite powerful, Rick.
It,
But
it
not, but
certainly
not,
can be.
but not normally in the refractory period, as you say. It's very quick for that.
It is an extremely swift turnaround. Yes. Um, it's one of those things that people often don't ask when they say that a building is haunted by the ghost of a Roman legionary or something like that.
Mm,
They often don't ask the completely obvious question as to um, when did the Roman legionary begin to haunt the building?
mm,
Because there are buildings, obviously, that were built 1,000 years after the Roman legionary's death, and then it was centuries after that that the Roman legionary started to haunt it. Some spirits have enormously long refractory periods.
mm. I know in our research we have looked into some that have freakishly short, like almost within a week, but they're often the victim of generally car like hit and runs, beheadings, terrified to death by a squirrel or a moose. Generally,
Yes, yeah. I mean, particularly things. It always feels to me that things that were associated with an enormous amount of noise and sudden violence,
mm.
not necessarily aggressive violence, but as you say, like a car accident or an attack by a squirrel.
Yeah. I, I, for those that haven't been attacked by a squirrel, it's incredibly noisy, surprisingly noisy. People wouldn't expect it.
And extremely painful.
massively. So you could see why the refractory period on those would be short. But a German lager incident, Rick, for 14 weeks, I was shocked when I first heard that.
It does seem. I'm I'm tempted to say there must be something about the circumstances that make it that quick, because it would seem to be extremely unusual as a case to be that quick. Um, it's it's barely it's barely enough time, for example, to um, complete the brewing process for a replacement barrel of lager.
That's true.
Um, it is it
Hmm.
is remarkable how quick that turnaround is.
I I spoke more to the people in the pub, and I know you did too. And I took more of a lager conversational route, and I know that when you went in to discuss it, you took more of an ale route.
I,
I
I did. I chose the ale trail. Yes.
the ale, it's always the way to go. The ale trail. It's it's the lager route ran cold, of course, very very quickly. I asked around, and it turns out that again there was no one that was directly um, served by the landlord's daughter as the last drink. It's always word of mouth in pubs, but in pubs, word of mouth is the best form of evidence. That's what pubs
It is.
grow on.
Yeah.
They
Absolutely.
say that anyone that tried to order lager in the last round, she refused to pour. That she would
Interesting.
a gin and tonic or a in more modern days pink sambuca would be offered, or even half a pint of Guinness, but never a lager. I was interested in your ale trail to follow up whether it was indeed the ghost of the landlord's daughter. The landlord's daughter would be very good at pouring ales. What was her? Did you ask much into the pouring ability? Did she short serve them or anything like that?
I definitely did find a couple of people who were reasonably confident that they'd been served by her. Confident enough to assert it in a place like a pub, where, as we know, the rules of civil discourse require that you are nothing but honest.
Mm.
Um, so, while it's possible they were mistaken, I'm sure this is what they believed. the The information I got implied that her pouring skills were um, perfectly satisfactory, but apparently her hand was a little bit shaky while pouring. So she, um, as one of them um, put it, she provided no shortage of head.
Well, it's par for the course for a landlord's daughter. But but my concern is that for men of a certain vintage, as you and I and many drinkers in pubs, especially of ales, following that fabled ale trail, um, a lot of girls in their early to mid 20s all look the same to us. Can the fact that she was the landlord's daughter be verified?
I'm sure it would be possible to sit down with these witnesses and take detailed notes, possibly with a sketch artist present. Um, but were they to do that, I think you might encounter the problem that while the the honourable nature of their evidence should absolutely be accepted, after their 10th or 12th pint of beer, their recollection of the details of the young woman might be it might be straining their memory a little.
The the ones that you asked, you there was this period of a few weeks after I brought this to you that you really went into the research beautifully, as you do, especially when it comes to pubs. You were at the top of
Mm.
your game. You would you would stay there till closing to ask your questions, and then you would be in again as soon as the pub opened at lunchtime to speak to the early
Yes.
drinkers. which is again exemplary research from you, Bishop, as always. Um, when you spoke around from those that might have drunk with her in the past, when they're a little bit more sober, a little bit hanging, no doubt, but sober. Um, was there say that she was actually employed when they returned the next day? Um, could they be certain? Were they certain that it was the landlord's daughter? Their tales from the past. When you were talking
They
to them sober, were they sure? Were they not telling tall tales anymore?
they were certainly confident in their recollection. However, um, each of them, as far as I could tell, had only been served by her on one occasion,
Mm-hmm.
and only it wasn't at the time that they noticed anything particularly unusual.
Mm-hmm.
It was later when, you know, talking to a friend, on the way home from the pub, and saying, I got served by the new barmaid, and the friend, of course, having no idea who they were talking about. It's the common way that people start to think curiously about their own experiences, as if somebody else gives them context, and that often happens after they were actually served. Um, so, in general, the recollections seem solid, as you say. When they were sober, they were still able to recount the story, but the actual memory and the detail was a little bit hazy.
See, in my mind, if the pub in question does indeed make use, whether meaning to or not, of a ghostly apparition serving pints at closing, then I'm all for it. Pubs are being squeezed massively for tax and costs right now.
Mm.
To have a free member of staff at closing must be a godsend and will keep the price of pints down.
I think it sounds wonderful if you could somehow manage to get a reliable shift pattern from her. That would be extremely useful. Though, I mean, I think we both believe that the exploitation of the deceased without fair recompense is a problem that still has to be addressed legally in this country.
And I don't want to drag you down that rabbit hole that you spent so much time in, of the union of the ghosts union from the 1920s, which which it got very messy.
Um, it 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 became fractious, and frankly, um, some harsh words were used.
The worst, that absolutely the worst thing in the UK. Harsh words.
Some very hurtful things were said.
Indeed. Well, I did go to the pub in the end when I found the building at least, as we,
Mhm.
um, and I did break in, Rick Bishop, as we spoke about before, and we were all
Yes.
everyone that's watching is vetted, so I know that I will not get in trouble for such things because we know where you live and so on. That's meant in a loving way, of course. It's to foster trust between us and you, the viewer. Um, but I did break in, and it was deserted, of course. It was the last patch. They'd built houses in the old people's homes, but they'd left the bar area was just a, a shed by then. It's almost as if people were too scared to put a house there. And I'd looked at the plans. I broke into the shed. I moved the wheelbarrow and the lawnmower that were there, and I pulled out a deck chair and I sat there with an empty glass, expecting to wait to see if the landlord's daughter would serve me. She'd always serve between 11:30 and 12:30 at night. So I waited there for an hour and a half, Rick.
And did you, in fact, see her?
Well, sadly, I did not. But I I don't put it down to it not being the case. There was no bar for her to work behind. Very little for her to pump. Uh, what she might have pumped would not have potentially given such a good head that she would require for service.
No.
And so I don't blame her if she was there for not turning up for work. But I definitely felt a presence. And that's all I can say.
And when you left
Hmm.
the building,
Yeah.
which was in the early hours of the morning.
About 12:45.
Okay. I assume you followed our normal practice of leaving a small amount of money behind to pay for any damage.
Of course, of course.
I would be very interested to find out, because of that, if you were to go back, even anonymously, in case there is hurtful words that could be used, if you were to contact the
Very words.
owners of that building, I would be fascinated to find if they actually picked up your money, because it's possible. It's a thought that just occurred to me that the landlord's daughter might consider it a tip.
It's incredibly interesting. You know, Rick, it's been a while since we've been out for a drink together, and I'm up to nothing tomorrow evening. And I know a shed with a potentially attractive, ghostly barmaid. If you wish to come and sit next to a lawnmower with me for an hour or two, we can look over some dusty tomes, bring some coins, and see what
That sounds
happens.
excellent. And I think we should also bring a small keg of beer
It's a good
and
idea.
some glasses,
Give
in the
her to the
hope
tools to work with.
that she might actually appear. Yes.
I,
What an experiment that would be.
it's very exciting to be able to do an experiment and suggest one live on stream. We won't give the address. It's a very small shed, and we don't want any more of our lovely Truth Foragers to turn up. She might be shy. Uh, we don't know. We'll let you all know, of course. If she does turn up on the next stream, we will, of course, let you know. Rick will write one of your papers, which have at least a dozen readers.
Some of them do reach that kind of number, and that's I think a solid reach, to be honest, based on what I hear from the rest of the community.
Bring your recorder as well, Rick. We can have a sing song while we're there.
Absolutely. Certainly, you do not want to hear my singing voice. So, if I blow air through a recorder, it will sound far better. I promise you.
So, although we are indeed going to research tomorrow night, I'm very excited. I'm interested to think about what you think we're going to find, Rick Bishop, because in the case of the landlord's daughter pulling ghostly pints in lock-ins, do you believe or do you remain skeptical?
Well, the story sounds so perfectly delightful, so local, so clear. There are eyewitnesses. There are people who seem completely confident locally, which is all far too convenient for me, I'm afraid. Um, so we will conduct our experiment, and I'm more than excited to be proven wrong. But for now, at least, until we've done our experiment, and I've sensed that feeling that you had in the shed, and the that sense of expectation, and my nose will sort of tell me if I'm on the trail, if you know what I mean. Um, until I experience that for myself, I have to remain skeptical, I'm afraid.
And this time, I accept that, Rick Bishop. I accept it. It follows your calling card. I'm not at all surprised from what you looked into it, and I'm really looking forward to proving you wrong tomorrow night. I felt something there. I felt a presence. I felt touched in the moment, and I think when you're there, just me and you, I think I'll feel touched again. And so unlike you, I believe. I believe in the landlord's daughter, and I believe that we shall experience something together in that shed tomorrow night.
Excellent. I'm looking forward to it more than I can say.
Wonderful. Well, again, already he believes. He's a believer already half spliced. If only we had space for you, my friend. If only we had space for you.
It's it's a lonely path that we tread.
But it has to be done. If you open it too wide, that trust circle gets broken.
It is impossible to push these things too far or too fast. Yes.
Well, those are our four urban myths, our urban legends for this evening. We hope that you've enjoyed them, dear foragers, and please complete those ID packs that Rick is sending out to you with everything you need to, so that by protecting us, we protect you, and that circle of trust forms. And make sure that the police and the MI5 and those that might be listening and not believing us are kept at bay for just a little while longer. Rick, I believe you've been told by the boys from the Baltic Star what they've asked us to advertise what they're doing tomorrow night.
That's correct. Yes. So tomorrow night, the boys from the Baltic Star will be back with a fighting fantasy game book.
Ah,
So Ewan and Ben will be along to play Return to Firetop Mountain,
now, I've
which was
heard
the
of that,
50th book in the original series.
and but that's a return to one of the early books, I believe.
The very first one, yes.
Ah,
Yes. And we have seen them play through the first book, Firetop Mountain, many moons ago on this channel, and tomorrow night we will get to see Ewan and Ben play through the sequel, book number 50 in the series, Return to Firetop Mountain.
from what
I'm
I've
quite
heard,
looking forward.
from what I've heard, I hope they do better than they did first time around.
Um, they do not have a brilliant record when it comes to these books. It has to be said. However, I admire the fact that they persevere.
Absolutely. And at least you can say that about them. As we do in our foraging, Rick. We persevere, we dig for the truth, we snuffle for our truth truffles.
We do. That's exactly what we do. And yes, it's been a pleasure and a privilege as always to talk through these four tales with you,
Oh,
and bring them to an audience
there's nowhere else I'd rather be, Rick, except that shed. But we'll be there tomorrow nights.
tomorrow night.
Um, for those watching, thank you so much. The boys from the Baltic Star have been adding our videos to their YouTube channel as well. So go to YouTube and type in the Truth Foragers. They've been uploading the full episodes, and they've been starting to break down because apparently people's attention spans are failing. So they're cutting them down into 20-minute chunks of different things. So please check those out. But we really appreciate you. We really appreciate that you care about the truth and getting to the bottom of things. And I know that Rick and I have looked, we've been given the timetable for the Boys in the Baltic Star for the next 4 or 5 weeks, and it appears there's no space for you and I, Rick. They're very busy on Saturday nights with other things.
Yes, it looks as if they have their over the next few weeks their regular sort of traveller games, and then a variety of other games, including some of their regular guests. So there's going to be lots for those who are regular viewers of their channel, I'm sure. Obviously, we are saddened not to be broadcasting for a few weeks, but we're guests on their channel, and they are very kind to us.
Exactly, and if any channel ever wants to invite the Truth Foragers on to take over some time, please feel free to. And we'll take whatever we can in virtual form, in streaming form, in real life form.
Absolutely.
Rick and I have a lot of
Yes.
truth to tell.
If you have space for the Truth Foragers have space in their hearts for you.
Well said, Rick. I couldn't have said it better myself. So good night, everyone. Sleep well, but before you go to sleep, remember to go to your cupboard and find any pack of biscuits you've got and grind them to a dust, because as Rick says, the government could be watching you. So sleep well, sleep safely, trust no one except us. Good night. Good night, Rick.
Good night, Dickie.